Okay, Harvey, what's today?
December 6, 2022, corresponding to Yud Gimel Kislev 5783.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're already a month of Kislev, so we have to start talking about Hanukkah. But tonight, we started saying Talmud yesterday, and there's a fascinating shiur from the Rush. We learned it together a few years ago. Probably in this group, there'll be a few people to remember. But I want to talk about it from a certain perspective. And it has to do with the topic of Minhagim. Minhagim is the whole concept of Minhagim is very fascinating. There's two types of Minhagim that we have, or the word Minhag is used in two different senses. One sense is things that people or communities took on to do that you're not required to do, but they started to do it anyway. A good example would be on Tisheni Shalgalius is called Minhag, where it says Minhag Avaseinu B'Yadenu. We follow the Minhag of that they had in Chutz La'aretz. The Gemara says in Psachim there's a parak called Makom Shenago. The Mishnah there talks about that in some places the minhag is not to do Melacha Erev Pesach the whole day. In other places they do Melacha. And the Gebrachs is a minhag. There's many things that we do that are minhagim, and the basis for why is it, the idea is that a minhag is binding. If you the Gemara says if you come from a place where there's a certain minhag, if you leave, you still have to keep the minhag, and if somebody comes to that place, they have to observe the minhag also because they have to be like chumri makom from where they came and where they went, because they are machlokas, otherwise be machlokas. So a minhag has a binding status. The Chassam Sofer has a big chiddush. He says that a minhag has a din of a neder, and therefore, because it's like nidrei mitzvah, and therefore it's considered a deraisa. He says if Chol Yisrael, the Pri Chadash holds that if you have no non-kosher animals in the flock, so there's no isser of Chol Yisrael. So he says but the minhag is anyway to be makbid on Chol Yisrael in any event. So he says if you hold like the Pri Chadash, so then Chol Yisrael is a minhag, and once it's a minhag, it becomes a deraisa. But if you hold not like the Pri Chadash, so then it's also Mikar Adin, but it's only also Midrabanan. It's like the opposite of what you would have expected. That according to the Pri Chadash, it's more chomer than even the Pri Chadash says there's no Isser Chol Yisrael, Chol Vakum. But since there's no Isser, so now there's a minhag, it becomes a deraisa. But this whole dimension of minhagim is binding. The Gemara says in Psachim that the reason why it's binding is because Gemara quotes the pasuk Shma b'ni musaricha al titosh tarasimech. Don't leave the Torah of your mother. And the Gemara says that refers to minhagim. That you're supposed to follow the minhagim of that your mother taught you, or the minhagim of the community. The essential idea behind another example is Gebrachs. The essential idea behind minhagim is that Yiddishkeit is based on Masorah. I mean, this is the way I always explain it. Everything is Masorah. If there's no Masorah, there's no Yiddishkeit. How do we know? The Torah was given 3,000 years ago, or 3,000 years ago. How do we know what we're supposed to do? How do we know the Torah is real? How do we know that people didn't add to it? How do we know what the words mean? How do we know Torah Shabbal Peh? Everything is based on Masorah. So if you part of Masorah is to follow things that are family legacies, and there's family legacies and there's communal legacies. So Chazal emphasized the importance of maintaining what our forefathers did. Now you could write a whole sefer on minhagim. I had a lot of trouble finding sources. I knew that there had to be a lot of discussion, but I didn't know where to find it. The first place I looked was in the Encyclopedia Talmudis. They got up to the letter Mem, but they're up to like Mem Lamed. So I missed like Malchus or something. So I missed out. I think they're planning to finish Encyclopedia Talmudis within another year. So we'll have to revisit the topic next year. But there's a wealth of issues that come up with minhagim. Well, one issue, for example, if you change places, so is the minhag still binding? It's relevant for people who move to Eretz Yisrael. When do they become b'nei? When if they're well, I mean, it's relevant for visitors, but also if you move. So are you a ben Eretz Yisrael? You ben Chutz La'aretz? Let's say you're. It's when they get for saving Talmud. The people from Eretz Yisrael come to America. Do they still follow the minhag of Eretz Yisrael and say V'sein Talmud from Zion Cheshvan, or do they follow the minhag of Chutz La'aretz? And what happens to people from Chutz La'aretz who go to Eretz Yisrael? Do they start early or they don't start early? So Rosh Zalman and other poskim have a pshara that say V'sein Talmud and Shema Koleinu, because b'diavad you yotze with V'sein Talmud. It's a machlokas whether you're required to follow minhag Eretz Yisrael, because some say because it's the what you daven for has to do with it's not so much because it's a minhag, it's because of the location. If you're in Eretz Yisrael, they need the rain, so you should be saying. But it's a machlokas. Some say but you're a ben chutzor, so you don't have to. So, but there's these shalos abound. What determines if you're still a member of the city? Some poskim say that if you left for a year, or less than a year, or more than a year, or if you left family behind. When I was in Eretz Yisrael in 1970, I asked Rav Elyashiv whether I should keep 2 days of Yantiv, 1 day Yantiv. If I was married, he would have told me for sure to keep 2 days of Yantiv, but I was single, so I knew that I had heard that some of the postmen in Eretz Yisrael said that if you're single, there's a strong likelihood or possibility that you'll find a shidduch in Eretz Yisrael and you'll stay. My friend Shai Portnight, that's what happened to him. He went to the Mir with no intention of staying, but he's still living in Eretz Yisrael because he married an Israeli girl. So Rabbi Yasha said, since my parents, I was there with my parents. He said, since your parents are planning to go back to America, so you should keep 2 days of Yantiv. But there's a lot of these shilos about minhagim. What happens if the basis for the minhag no longer applies? That's endless discussions about gebrachs, about kitnios. Why do we have to still keep kitnios? The reason was because people would get confused. Kitnios looks like the bread from kitnios looks like real bread, and they'll think that you got to eat chametz and Pesach. In the meantime, the potato starch cakes look more chametzik than the real stuff, and you can't tell them apart. And there's no isser. You can go buy yourself chocolate cake and cookies and pizza and pasta and all those things, but you can't eat beans. So why does that make sense? So there's all these. It's the yearly topic for discussion. Is it binding? Is it not binding? How much is it binding? Well, there's a whole wealth of issues that are related to minhagim, but I want to talk about a different dimension of minhag, and that is the concept of the minhag hamakom in terms of what is the psak halacha. When you have different opinions in halacha, which opinion do you follow? So there's many things where there's a minhag. Mishnah Berurah and the Aruch HaShulchan oftentimes say the minhag ha'olam is like this. This is the minhag. That's the minhag. L'mashal, the Chavetz Chaim says about if you need a kazayas to make a bracha achrona, a kazayas for cake, you have to have a kazayas of flowers. So what do you add the other ingredients or not? I think the Chavetz Chaim says he holds that it should be just the flour, has to be kazayas, but the minhag ha'olam is to add the other ingredients as well. If it's fluffy, do you have to squash it, or you don't squash air pockets? No, there's the minhag ha'olam. It's what people commonly do. So that's a second form of minhag, that that there's what we call common practice or mainstream halacha. That's also that's typically referred to as a minhag. So it's really the two issues, maybe they're related, but they're two separate things. The one minhag is where it's a definitely something that they didn't practice years ago, but now became the minhag, and the other one is things where the issue is not, it's not a new issue, it's an old issue. But the question is, what's the minhag? What's the minhag with tefillin? Do you put on tefillin like Rashi or like Rabbeinu Tam? There's all sorts of issues in halacha. So how much weight do you give to the minhag? It's well known that the Aruch HaShulchan gives much more weight to Minhagim than the Chavetz Chaim. The Aruch HaShulchan constantly writes that there's a mitzvah to be miyashev the minhag olam and justify it. The Chavetz Chaim, he seems to reluctantly he'll quote the minhag olam, but he's not. He doesn't seem to be such a big fan of it. And they people say because the Aruch HaShulchan was a Rav, and the Chavetz Chaim was he was a private citizen. He sat in Radin, and he first he ran a grocery store, and then he closed down the grocery store because everybody came to buy by the Chavetz Chaim, and everybody else went out of business. So that's what they say, that the Chavetz Chaim therefore was less the Masorah of what common practice is was stronger by the Aruch HaShulchan and the Chavetz Chaim. But there's a wealth of questions about this second type of minhagim, where you're trying to determine what is the practice and how much weight does the minhag have, and if a posuk decides, well, for the last few hundred years they paskin like the Taz, but I think we should now pass like the Magen Avraham. Can a posuk do that? Does minhag, does common practice play a role? There's the first type of minhag. It's not common practice. The first type of minhag is something that they instituted. They decided that they're not going to eat kitnios. So that was everybody decided they're going to do it. The question is, how much is it binding? But the second type of minhag is not something that was it's not something that we instituted. It's the common practice. How much is that binding? And the reason why I'm going to discuss this is because there's a terrific tshuva from there's two tshuvas in the Rush, where the Rush decided that he's going to do away with common practices that probably were in place for hundreds of years. He moved from Germany to Spain, and when he got to Spain, he decided one has to do with Prusbul. We saw that tshuva last year, that he decided in Spain they didn't write Prusbuls. Nobody did Prusbuls, and they collected the chayvus anyway. That was the minhag hamakom, and whatever the halachic justification is, a lot of the Achronim try to offer a different, the Marik and others offer different explanations. But that was one tshuva that the Rush has, and the other tshuva is about the Saint Talmud. The Rush, when he came to Spain, he decided that they needed rain, so he was going to say the Saint Talmud after Pesach, and he was going to start saying the Saint Talmud the Zayin Cheshvan in Chutz La'aretz, and in both instances it was a tremendous tumult about what he was doing, that he changed common practice. So how much does common practice play a role in halacha? So there are, and so I'm going to go on with you the tshuva of the two, both tshuvas of the Rush, which are the reason why I thought about doing it is because we did one last year and we would do one about 4 years ago. But to me they're both the same idea, that the Rush was not afraid to change the minhag hamakom. He wasn't deterred by the fact that for hundreds of years this is what they're doing, and that's because the Rush was one of the greatest poskim. The Rush was the Beis Yosef said that he paskins based on the 2 out of the 3, whoever the majority is, the Rambam, the Rif, the Rambam, and the Rush. So the Rush represented one of the 3 pillars of Psak Halacha. The Rush, I saw in one sefer it said that the Rush, people spoke about the Rush as a malach. So the Rush was a Talmud of Marami Rutenberg, and in spite of all his tzaras, and he had to flee Germany because he was afraid they would kidnap him the way they did his Rebbe, the Marami Rutenberg. But he was a giant, and he's still the basis for Psak Halacha. But the Rush felt that he's going to change it. He didn't He wasn't deterred. So that's what I want to talk about this topic. So this idea that is there a basis in the Gemara for this idea of mainstream halacha or common practice? Does the Gemara talk about that ever? That you should do, you should base psak halacha, because that's always a big issue in psak halacha. I always say that that's the hardest part of being a rabbi. Well, I wouldn't say it's the hardest part, but one of the challenges of being a rabbi, the other things that are harder, dealing with people. But to try to always maintain shalom, and different people have different perspectives. But a rabbi has to paskin, and if you look in enough svarim, you could have 20 different opinions. So who do we follow? What's
I don't know if this directly applies. The concept of chadash asim min Torah. I think if the rush, if there's a prevalent minhag in this country, and then he moves to another country where it's not prevalent, does that fall under the rubric of chadash min
Well, Chadash Hashem Torah was the Chassam Sofer. He didn't coin that phrase. The Gemara says Chadash Hashem Torah, but in a totally different meaning. Is that the Isser Chadash is an Isser Deraisa. But the Chassam Sofer was, we fought against the Reform movement, and that's what either he or others said Chadash Hashem Torah, but it doesn't. It has no halachic. But the Gemara says there's two places where the Gemara actually talks about the common practice. So the first is on the first page. So the Yerushalmi in Baba Metzia says Hasocher Esapolim v'Amar Lahem Lahashkim Lahariv. The person hired workers, and he made up with them that they have to come early and they have to stay late. They have to put in more than a 8-hour workday. So even though he signed a contract with them and he's paying them a nice salary for 10 hours work a day, but if nobody works 10 hours, they have the same labor disputes then as they have now. So if nobody's gonna, then that the minhag is not to work so late and it starts so early. So then he can't force them, even though he made up with them that he's going to that they're hired for that period of time. So the Gemara, so the Yishalmi says, Amar Rav Hoshia Zosameres Haminag Mevatel Es Halacha. So this is an extremely important phrase. Minhag is Mevatel Halacha. That's so powerful that you would think it's just the opposite, that halacha would be mevatel minhag, or that minhag has to move over for halacha. But the Yerushalmi says just the opposite. It says the minhag mevatel halacha. The minhag is so strong that it's mevatel halacha, and we're not talking about the first type of minhag where people decided to institute something. We're talking about the minhag of common practice. So the common practice is mevatel halacha. And now, in this case of Asocher Esapolim, it's not such a big chiddush, this idea of minhag mevatel halacha, because if everybody knows that nobody works more than 8 hours a day, so even though the person says, I'm hiring you for 10 hours a day, you could say that it's meaningless what he says. Not because the minhag creates a halachic precedent, but because it's understood that he doesn't mean anything when he says that, because he's not. It's like if a person's in a play and he tells a woman, so it doesn't mean anything because he's in a play. So a person says something, and because language is the meaning of language is based on culture and how the languages are used. So if the words that I want you to work hashkim harav mean that you should start at 9 and end at 5, so it doesn't matter what he's thinking in his head. But nonetheless, the poskim quote this phrase extensively, the minhag mevatel halacha. That a minhag, and they use it in many other contexts. The other place where the Gemara makes a statement about minhag and halacha is the Gemara says, you look at the bottom of the page, the Gemara says in Brachos, there was a machokes, things that are not from the chameshes mini dagam, things that are not grain. So you make a shahako and a bari nefashos or a bari pri-eitz or bari pri-dama. So the Mishnah says machlokes whether you make a bracha rishona and the bracha chrona or just the bracha chrona. So Rabbi Tarfon says that you say bari nefashos. Chacham disagreed. So the Gemara says Amalei Rava bar Rav Chanan Abai V'Amilei Rav Yosef Hilchus Amai. What's the halacha in this machlokes? Do you make a bracha chrona on payros, so you don't? Do you say bari nefashos? Samara says, Ambalei puk chazi ma amah devar. Go out and see what is the common practice. So Rashi says, Ukvar ma amah devar heich nogim. What do people do? Ukvar nogu levar betchilo shahakol himself bari nefashos rabbis chesed kol mashavar. The common practice is what we do is we make a bracha rishona of shahakol and the bracha chrona you say bari nefashos. So that is, even though it was a machokas tanaim in the Mishnah, and the Gemara wasn't sure how we paskin, but common practice establishes what the halacha is. So this is mamish what we're talking about. Common practice. Ma im ama devar. It means what's the common practice. The Gemara uses the same expression in Erevin, right above this. I underlined the wrong thing because what I underline is the Gemara in Erevin quotes the Gemara in Brachas, but a little bit higher up, the Gemara is talking about how wide a lechi should be. There's how a lechi for an Erev. So the Gemara says the same thing, that how wide does it have to be? So the Gemara says, where is it? It's up here someplace, a few lines from the bottom. But the Gemara says, yeah, about 3 lines from the bottom of the And Rashi says, so it's the same idea. That's really the fundamental principle that we're talking about. That halacha is established by common practice, and if for generations people are doing something a certain way, so that establishes what the halacha is. So I told you I spent a lot of time trying. Who talks about this principle of Maya Amad Devar? Where's their discussion about this? So I looked, and finally I found I had a friend in the Mir, Reuben Shapansky. He married Shmuel Birnbaum's daughter. He became sort of one of the Rosh Yeshivas. So his father was Yisrael Shapansky. He was a European person. He went in yeshivas in Europe, and he was a tremendous Talmud Chacham. He did work for the Encyclopedia Talmudis. He wrote a number of different svarim that were very scholarly. So he wrote a sefer called Takanas B'Yisrael. He has, I think, 3-4 volumes, all about takanas during different generations over the centuries. And in the back of the last volume, he has a section on Minhagim Mivato Halacha. This is the first page. He has 30 pages on this topic, Minhagim Mivato Halacha, and it's full of footnotes. And there's enough material here to spend a few weeks learning it. And so that's one place. And the other place I found, he quotes it, is the Stei Chemed. The Stei Chemed is an encyclopedia that was written about 150 years ago by, what was the name of the author of the Stei Chemed? Was Chaim Chizkiyahu Medini. And it's an amazing, the Stei Chemed is just unbelievable. It's hard to understand how this was before pre-computers and Torah and HebrewBooks.org and all that. He has an unbelievable wealth of knowledge about every single topic, and he quotes thousands and thousands of tshuvas extensively. So he has it goes somewhat in alphabetical order. So he has on Minhag, he has about 40 pages, and he discusses this issue of Ma'amar Dvar extensively also. So there's a wealth of material here. If any of you would like to write a sefer on a topic that hasn't been dealt with too well, you could spend the next 10 years working on Minhagim. It's very there's a Rabbi Sperber, or Rabbi Dr. Sperber. We have it here. Billy Gurtz donated it to the shul. He's a professor in Bar Ilan, maybe, or someplace in Eretz Yisrael. He was. Oh, he's not alive. So he wrote on Minhagim. But and it's the Greens farm here. But he doesn't discuss this dimension. He doesn't discuss. He talks about the first type of minhagim, where they adapted different policies and but he doesn't talk about. But Rabbi Shapansky talks about it in his sefer. And then the Steichem but they quote so many Mar Makamos. I mean, you have to look everything up, and so I didn't have enough time to go through everything. So and you're gonna what I'm basically gonna ask is that how come this principle of Mayamar Dvar, how come the Rush seems to have ignored that? The Rush came to Spain, and he did away with the minhag hamakom, and it wasn't just in Spain. He when he was in Germany, he didn't like the minhag, and when he came to Spain, he decided, that's it, we're changing the minhag, and he would have changed it if he had his way. He would have changed it for all of European Jewry. So, and the same thing with Prusbel, he didn't like the minhag that he kept in Spain. So how come that is not in conflict with this principle of my Amar Devar? That's what eventually what I want to get to. I don't know if we'll come to a conclusion tonight, but that's the topic of the thing. So first question is what's the reason why my Amar Devar? What do I care what people do? Why does that matter? What people do? And what happened to the concept of minhag tos, that you have many times the poskim will say it's a minhag tos. So, for example, Ramosha, I quoted this many times. Ramosha has a tshuva about using canvas for the sukkah walls. So, in Shulchan Aruch, you're not allowed to you shouldn't use urios, which are curtains, because they might blow in the wind, and then your sukkah would be invalid if they're not tied down well. So Ramosha says that it's the minhag in America is to use canvas. So he says, but the only thing is, he says he doesn't know if it's a valid minhag. He says it could be it's a minhag hasoichrim. The merchants made this and made it customary. But so the fact that everybody was doing it, that doesn't make it into a minhag. Some minhagim are minhag tos and some minhag are real. So how do you know whether? How do you know who originally decided on the minhag? The minhag, you don't know where did the minhagim came from. I give an example: is that the minhagim are still evolving. When I came to Lakewood, everybody wore short sleeves, and at least 2/3 of the guys in yeshiva wore color shirts. Now, if you decide to go learn in Lakewood, I recommend that do not wear colored and don't wear short sleeves, or you will be laughed out of the yeshiva. They won't let you stay.
Actually, they'll come over to you very nicely and offer you a sefer because they'll assume you're a visitor.
They'll offer you what?
A sefer because they'll assume you're a visitor. So
You got a picture of Moshe last week where he had this over shirt that had some color in it.
Yeah? Well,
Take a look at the picture.
there you are.
If you look at pictures
They'll
from
have
the,
to fix it.
Moshe was never very yeshiva.
if you look at pictures from the 1930s, there were
Maybe you wouldn't be able to get into Lakewood today.
They were wearing gray hats.
They're wearing grants. Yeah. What did you say, Jack?
Colored shirts.
I said maybe Ramosha wouldn't be able to get into Lakewood today.
That's true. So things, yeah, and also we wore straw hats in Lakewood. Everybody had a straw hat in the summer. So
Is that a minhag?
what?
Is that like at the level of a minhag?
No, it's not a minhag. I mean, it's not. It's nonsense. That's what it is. It's just it's social norms, but it's not.
It's a similar type thing. I actually have a friend who wrote a book about this. The overwhelming practice, the beginning to be overwhelming practice for Americans in Eretz Yisrael to keep one day of Yom Tov. Clearly counter halacha psuka, but nevertheless, the majority of Americans now visiting Eretz Yisrael keep one day of Yom Tov.
Yeah. So the question is that a real minhag? Do we say?
Majority what?
Majority of visitors?
Yeah, I know that. I know because people every time they go to Israel, they come and they petition me that I should tell them it's okay. I tell them it's not okay. All the contemporary poskim said. We discussed it. Yeah, all the major contemporary poskim, Rav Moshe and Rav Yashav Rav Wosner a whole slew of poskim. They all were opposed to it. Okay, but that's that's old shiur. That was already the Shmuel Salant had a position about that 200 years ago, but the shiur goes back to the Beis Yosef. The Beis Yosef has.
But the minute has overwhelmingly been shifting in the last.
Okay, so
20 years.
the question is that called a minhag? That's what I'm saying. That what constitutes a minhag? 30 years ago, nobody sang Imesh Kachech at the chuppah before they broke the glass. Nobody did it. Now it's the minhag. So is that a binding minhag? Is that part of the ceremony, or even more so? It's not a minhag that whoever
The Haredi weddings, they don't.
the Haredi,
not-
it's encroaching into most of the at least 50% of the Haredi weddings I've been at.
Wow.
Right, 10 years ago, the Haredis didn't. I asked Rabbi Belsky if I should do my son got married. He said Chas v'shalom, because he didn't believe in starting new customs. Not because it's not beautiful. It's very moving. You watch the parents at the chuppah; they're crying, all of them, and the chas and kala swaying back and forth. So it's very nice. But Rabbi Belsky didn't want to have new minhagim and that's how some minhagim start, because some people do it. And the latest minhag at Chassan is you have to stand up for everybody, even the little kids that march down with the flowers. You have to stand up. That's the minhag, to stand up. And if you don't, nobody stood up for the Chassan and Kala years ago. Now, if you don't stand up, you're shaken. So that's why I stand up, because I don't want them to think I'm irreligious. I'll make a chil Hashem that I don't stand up for the Chassan and Kala. Okay, so but it's this whole parsha is very fascinating. How do you decide whether minhagim are valid or not? Who decides if it's a minhag tos or not a minhag tos? But what is the reason why a minhag is this idea that so the Gemara says go see what common practice is. Who cares what common practice is? Why does that make a difference? What common practice is? Why is that relevant? Why is minhag mivata halacha? Why should minhag have such a tremendous impact? So two explanations. First, I happened to bump into we're doing a search in the web. I saw Aish posted an article by Rav Aryeh Kaplan, who Zichronu V'Racha, was a very, very prolific writer and a translator. He died very young. It was a tremendous loss. Mm-hmm. So he says here, you could read it. He says that basically it's a sign when there's a common practice. It's a sign that the God has given his stamp of approval. Any practice, decision, or code that is universally accepted by the Jewish people is assumed to represent God's will and is binding as such. Even when a decision is initially disputed, the commonly accepted opinion becomes binding as law. That's what he says. He compares that to the fact that you can't argue with the Talmud Bavli, because once it became codified, so that's the final word. You can't say I have a chiddush and I want to disagree with Abaye or something like that. But I didn't see that in this is the only place I saw it, is that he writes. I mean, I heard that in over the years in yeshiva. That's what people used to say, that there's a certain hashgacha pratis of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. The machlokas between the Hasidim and the Misnagdim. I don't think anybody would say now. It used to be that it was like, as much as you have the never Trumpers and the Trumpers, and there was so much hatred in it. That's the same way Chassidim and Misnagdim. But now there are no real Misnagdim anymore, and there's no real Chassidim, that they don't tolerate each other. So it became more or less accepted. So we assume that that's what Rebbeinu Shalom wanted. When the Lubavitcher Rebbe went to see the Vilna Gaon, he refused to see him. So at that time, it was still the controversy was very heated. But now it's everybody holds of Hasidim and Misnagdim, and also, I mean, maybe the Hasidim are more biased towards Hasidim and the Misnagdim towards Misnagdim, but I mean, all the great Hasidic Rebbe's.
The fact that Hasidim daven too late is still not acceptable. The fact that they do it and nobody
That's
makes
right.
a fuss about
That's-
it, it's wrong. I mean,
Well,
the fact that
Yusa, boy, don't say that in Ger or Satmar. They did it based on their rebellion. We don't. There's certain things the Chassim do that
I think Garrick
are
is
I've also
makbid on
moderated
Zmanim.
it to some level.
they're very hard to understand. The same thing with sitting in the sukkah, not sitting in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. That's the Chassidish Shemina. There's a lot of ink has been spilled on that to try to
More
figure out
complicated.
what.
That's a slightly more complicated issue.
That's
But
more
Zmanim and-
more easily justified. Maybe.
Tefillah is not.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a big pella. What was Manfil? They say because you have to have proper chavana and achanas and this and that. They also they'll eat before davening, which is there is a halacha. You're allowed to eat if you need to eat before having kavana. Okay, but I'm saying there is such a concept floating around in the olam hayeshivas that God works things out. Who becomes a gadol? That's along the same lines. Who are the gedolim? We're supposed to listen to the gedolei Yisrael. Who decides who the gedolim is? What makes somebody into a gadol? What's the criteria? There's no election. So it's generally assumed that it's hashgacha pratis. The Rebbeinu Shalom wanted Ramosha to be the posek achron in America, so he became the posek achron. Everybody knew that he was the posek achron. The Klal Yisrael has their own way of figuring things out, which is divinely inspired. But I didn't see this in all the research that I did, very limited, albeit very limited, but I didn't see anybody offer this explanation why Minhagim Mevatel Halacha, because it's a sign of divine providence that God wants it to be that way. So the Magen Avraham in Hilchos Megillah, there the Magen Avraham is commenting. I don't have it here in the page, but the Shulchan Aruch says that the minhag was to when they mentioned the name of Haman, so that they would write Haman's name on paper and they would bang on the paper or on racks, and that became them, and then it became a minhag to make noise when they mentioned Haman. And the Shulchan Aruch says that that's a minhag. You shouldn't violate the minhag. So the Magen Avraham here talks about this concept that minhag v'ata halacha, and he says, where I have it underlined in the bottom of the page, in the right side, Merainer of Isaac Stein, Bibiur Smag, Damrinan Kosov, Had Damrinan minhag oker halacha. That was the Gemara. The Yushalmi says the minhag is oker halacha. So, by the way, it's so interesting that this is the new print of the Shulchan Aruch. In the old print of the Shulchan Aruch, the standard print, it says Harosh Bibiuro on the Smag. So I never knew that the Rosh wrote a beer on the on the Smag, and I would have wasted countless hours if I had used all my search tools to try to see the different versions of the Smag with the different mefarshim and look for the Rosh's parish on the Smag. But the whoever put out the new edition did an excellent job. So the Rosh is an acronym. It stands for Rav Isaac Stein. It's nothing to do with with the original Rosh, who was Rav Usher ben Yechiel. Rav Usher ben Yechiel. Yaakov was the Rosh's son. That's the Baal HaTurim. So, but this is different. I never heard of this person, Rav Isaac Stein. So, but that's the printer is abbreviated.
The Smag was also after the Rush.
What?
The Smag was after the Rush, so the Rush couldn't have written on the Smag.
That's also true. That's another good point. You're right. I didn't think it when I originally saw it. I thought I'll look for it, but I should have asked you. So the what does he say? He says, "Minhag zmata halacha kasav hadam rinan minhag oker halacha hainu afilu rov deos svirlei aser v'atalmud misayehu." Even if in most opinions in the Gemara hold that it's aser, and the minhag says it's mutter, you follow the minhag. That's how powerful minhag mevata halach is. He says, and even if the minhag bane alpi hapiskasa o svarim chitzonim, even if it's based on external svarim, Amrina minig okra halacha. Now I didn't know what's this svarim chitzonim. It sounds like they're apocryphal svarim. It's not. What? What?
History books.
History books.
This was the minhag in this place.
Yeah, so that's not what it means though. That would be. That's what I thought. I thought. No, it's svarim. I forgot what maybe Rabbi Shapansky says it. It's the late things that are the Masechtas Ketanis, like the Masechtas Mezuzah, which are included in Shas, but they were written at a later period of time. So those are called Svarim Chitzonim because they're not part of the original body. So he says even in such a case, it's amazing that even though the Rav in the Talmud is not Messiah and Rav in the Poskim hold that it's Aser. And even though it's a principle of the Achiram Lahatos, nonetheless you say Minhag Oker Halacha. So it's a pella. What kind of din is this? So he says the Vadai Kain Kibul Avoseno Ish Mi Piyish. Because if it's an established minhag, it must be that it was approved by the poskim of past generations. That's the pshat in this din of minhag Oker Halacha. Because the minhag, it's not that the minhag has so much power or authenticity. It's the minhag reflects if it became common practice, there had to be a reason why Jews were doing it. Otherwise, the gedolim and the poskim of each generation would have put their foot down. They would have objected. So it raises a bit. The question is: so how come that sometimes it's minhag tos? Obviously it means that some minhagim the gedolim are not successful in getting the people to deter from doing it. You know, a good example of this is could you make kiddush on schnapps? Schnapps is chamar medina. You could definitely use chamar medina, although it says in the Shulchan Aruch that chamar medina is only when you don't have wine. But those people that make on schnapps, they even if they have plenty of wine, they make on schnapps. But the bigger shaila is, what's the shiur? So, do you say that since the shiur is a revius, so you have to have a revius of schnapps, and you have to drink rov revius, which will probably knock you out. I mean, I don't know, I'm not a drinker, so I don't know, but it's a lot to drink, and you have to drink it in 1 or 2 gulps in order to be Yotzei. The Shita holds that by liquids you need Kedei Shtiyas Revius within. You don't have Kedei Achilas Pras. Or do you say that since nobody drinks that way, so the what's comparable a schnapps glass of schnapps is equal to a revius of wine. So that is a machlokas, the Taz and the Magen Avram. So the Mishnah Berurah doesn't even mention that the Taz holds that way. The Mishnah Berurah just says that you can't make kiddush on schnapps. That period. That's all. But the Chassidim, they all follow the Taz. For whatever reason, they follow the Taz. So according to the Mishnah Berurah, he would say, I imagine, that it's a minhag tos. Everybody's doing it. You go into any shtibur or even not a shtibur, any young Israel, people are making kiddush on schnapps. It's a universal. Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan's criteria of universal acceptance certainly would apply to kiddush on schnapps. It's close to universal. It's the majority. The majority of it's okay. You're right. It's not universal. Okay, but it's the majority of people.
Yeah, I feel like the majority.
I gotta go.
You don't think it's the majority?
No.
No?
In certain communities, not here. I don't know. I don't
No,
think it's the
here.
majority.
I'll tell you, no, a lot more Orthodox shuls, it's the majority. It's not nothing to do with Chassidus. It's just-
Yeah,
it's
I don't know.
become a custom.
People who are drinkers make on schnapps. That's.
Certainly a large, more than a miyut hamatzli.
I think-
Maybe it's not so but there
And it has
are hundreds of.
Okay, we could do it. We could do a survey. Okay, you actually.
Many people wait for somebody to motzi them with kiddush, then they have schnapps.
I never saw that. maybe 1 or 2.
The people who drink drinking the schnapps don't have a problem with the revius either. So
But they don't use a reverse.
That's a good.
They should.
No, that's he's saying they have no problem drinking your revius, but they don't. They don't drink your revius. Okay, so I'm just saying. So this is how do we know what's considered minig tos when the Chafetz Chaim throughout Orach Chaim writes that the minig ha'olam is to do something a certain way, but he is dismissive of it. Obviously, why is he dismissive? Why does he say minig oker halacha? How come he's so flippant about it? Why does he do the same thing Aruch HaShulchan does? Because he obviously held that it's not an authentic minig. It's people didn't know there were a lot of amratzim in Europe. Not every today we have the people are more affluent, so almost. Every kid goes through 8th grades at least of Yeshiva Tana, and they know more. And in Europe, you had people they were very unlearned, many people, so they didn't know. So they used to do. But it's how do you ever know which is which? How do you know that the Avram says that even if it's connected the mainstream opinions in the Talmud, and it's based on Svarim Chisorim, still minig oker halacha. The valley kach kibul I was saying ishmi piish. It's a very powerful statement. So how do you know when that's the case and when that's not the case? I had I'm not even getting up to the rush today, but we'll do it next week. There's the Ramesha. You know the Vilna Gaon was unique. Normally, it's assumed that you can't an Achron can't disagree with a Rishon.
Mm-hmm.
The Vilna Gaon disagreed with the Rishonim, and it was commonly accepted that the Vilna Gaon was on the par of a Rishon because of he was the giant that he was in Torah. He was equal to a Rishon, and therefore he had the authority to disagree with Rishonim. But it troubled me. Why don't we say how can he disagree with the Rishonim? It's minig mevatel halacha. Well, this is what they're doing for the last 400 or 500 years. Then comes along the Vilna Gaon and says, I don't agree with the Rambam or the Rif or
Because
the
they're-
Rishon that argued with the Gaonim, that was not uncommon. There was a minig of the Gaonim, and then they said,
okay. So it's
it's not
same.
a new thing.
It's the same question. Yeah.
But they gave their reasoning, and he said their reasoning is wrong. It's not just a practice that he's saying is wrong because they they just did it without reasoning. He's saying they had an argument, and the argument is wrong. That's why.
So when you explain why you don't agree with the common practice, so that it's not binding. Okay, that's what I'm gonna probably talk about next
There's a
week.
minhag to us that people used to not duchen on Shabbos, and there was somebody in the shul who, for a few years, refused to duchen on Shabbos.
When on Yantiv.
No, Yantif that comes out on
Yantiv
Shabbos.
on Shabbos.
There were people, and Rav Soloveitchik got in a lot of trouble. When he first got to Boston, he went into a shul and they didn't want to
They
do
fired
on
him.
Shabbos, and he said they shouldn't. They told him, "Don't come back here." That's what happened.
Yeah, they fired him.
But that was a minhag to us.
I think there was a minute here. Something to do on Yom Kippur. They didn't. When I first came, they didn't say Aleinu, or they did say Aleinu, or something. And by Mincha, I don't know. Okay, Ramesha has an amazing tshuva here. Ramesha, this tshuva, I didn't print out the whole thing. This is a long series of tshuvas Ramesha had about a woman that has an ear infection and she wants to go to the mikveh. Could you put a piece of cotton in the ear so that it shouldn't get wet? And he wrote about 4 or 5 tshuvas. There may be a total of about 30 pages. I was trying to figure out how old he was. It was written in Taf Reish Tzadik Dalet. So Taf Reish Tzadik Dalet was 34, and Ramosha died in 85, and he was about 90. So he was born in like 1890 or something like that. He was under 40. He was just shy of 40. So here, look how he writes. He says, "Mashakasav Yedidi." But some of these chuvas are to his uncle. I don't remember if this was his uncle or. He says, "Mashakasav Yedidi, Eich Rishayim Ano Lismach Achidushim Ke'ela Shebiarti Lamaisa Ufratchahu Keneged Eza Achronim." The Ramosha came up with very big chidushim about these earplugs. And so the person that was writing this says you make up your own psak halacha that's different than mainstream. Hine ani amar v'chi kvar nasa kates l'gvul Torah. Ramesh said I don't agree. Well, you think that the Torah is everything is etched in stone? Chas v'shalom shenifsak rak ma shenimsa b'sfarim. We're not bound, but that we only have to pass in exactly like it says in the Svarim. Because she's dam l'sheilah shalom nisu b'sfarim lo nachriya osam after shidei yesh v'denu nachriya. And if we have new shaylos, we shouldn't pass in because it's not in the Svarim. V'adei niyastaiti osalomer kain. The v'adei od yagdil Torah gam ata b'znamenenu. Torah still will flourish in our times. U'mechuyev kol mi shebiyado l'achriya kol din she'yavo liyado k'fi ha'efshelo. Anybody that's capable of paskening, b'chakir drisha hate to be shas poskim avana yishara v'rayis lechonos. He has to be not somebody who doesn't know how to learn, but he knows how he has rayas. Avshu din chadash or diro dosu b'sfarim. Even if it's a completely new psak halacha, it's valid. V'af b'din hanimsa b'sfarim v'adei shetzarach amar gamkin l'habin oso u'achriya b'dait l'kodem shiura. He says even if something is written down in a sefer, the pasking does not mean to quote what it says in the sefer. You can't pass just because it says in the sefer. The Havi Zek Mar Mitoch Mishnaso shall Zenamar at the name Mevali Olam Shamar Halach Mitoch Mishnasam. The Gemara says if you passing just based on what you have been told without understanding the whole sugya, that you're destroying you're corrupting halacha. And then he says, even if we sometimes paskin against some of the gedolei ha'achronim, Ramesha argues with the Chassam Sofer in a number of places. Ma bekach, so what? Ramesha says, so what? Avadi Rishayim af anu l'lachog al ha'achronim, v'gam l'famim al ezer Rishonim, kishiyesh rayis l'chon. And sometimes you can even disagree with the Rishonim. V'ikar gam b'taimim nechonim, but as long as you have good reason. Came in she'eno neged apostle before son bali shulchan aruch shenis kabel chol medina seino. Okay, also is in there. Number makim inichus kadol. You can't. Ramesh says you can't disagree with the shulchan aruch, but you could disagree with other major poskim, even if they're Rishonim. I don't know what he says. He can't disagree with shulchan aruch, but the many achronim disagree with the shulchan aruch. The Magen Avraham and the Taz and the Shach and others, they oftentimes disagree with the Psak of the Shulchan Aruch. But I don't know. So I don't know. But the Ramesh says you could. It's astounding that he says that you could disagree with earlier Achronim, and he says Lefamim al Ezer Rishon. You could even disagree with Rishonim. When you if you have strong rayas, you could disagree with Rishonim. So here I'd ask the same question that. How could Mel sort of is providing the answer? But what happened to Minhagim Mevatel Halacha? This is if the Rishonim hold that way. So this has been going on for already 700-800 years. Now you can come along and say I disagree with the Rishonim, and we're going to do it differently. So, but okay. So Mel is saying that because if you disagree with the Rishon, so what does it matter that they're doing it for a few hundred years? Okay, well, I'd have to discuss that. What?
In the case of minhag about the halacha, though, the minhag that is mevatel that halacha also probably was going on for some period of time.
Yeah, that's what the Magen Avraham says. That the reason why the minhag is mevatel halacha is because it reflects the fact that was what previous gedolim held.
The ability to disagree with Rishonim on that, even though the Rishonim's halacha has been in place for hundreds of years. We don't know how long the minhag was also in place. When it was also. So maybe we're not saying that we're disagreeing with Rishonim. It's that when we say minhag mevatel halacha to disagree with Rishonim, right? It's
minhag mevatel halacha is just the opposite. It's that even though the Rishonim say one way, but we don't have to follow the Rishonim if the minhag is different.
That's what he said.
The point is the minhag was different because at the time of the Rishonim there was a Rishon who held of that minhag.
there were, according to Magen Ram, it means that there were others that didn't agree. We only have a fraction of the Svarim that were written. We don't know how many.
So if there's a minhag that is, it's always been done this way, it's the minhag, and therefore it's mabata, whatever the.
Because it means there were other gedolim.
There were other Rishonim.
There were other Rishonim who may be greater than the Ritva. We only have a fraction. On Hebrew books or on Otzar Chachma, I have 120,000 svarim. So that's. But who knows how many there was so during the Holocaust? Who knows how many svarim were lost? And then when was it? Yeah, when was that? 1292. 1280, 1290. Yeah, where they burned. They had wagon loads of svarim. So those things were lost. It won't be restored until Mashiach comes. And so we don't know how many. The Meiri has become a mainstream posuk, but they didn't have the Meiri until 100 years ago. He's so what's considered mainstream and what's not mainstream is very. So with that, this idea though of minig mivat halacha is that if Klal Yisrael is doing it a certain way, then we could generally assume that there's a reason for it, and it didn't. But okay, so well, next week I'm going to show you the tshuva from the Rush where he comes to Spain and he created an uproar. He decided to do away with the halachas. On Pesach, they were going to say Tfilas Tal, and he made an announcement. Don't say Tal this year. We're going to say Tal Mater or Mashiach Ruach on Pesach, and so you see that he wasn't deterred by the fact that minig mivat halachas. That's what I want to discuss.
1242.
Well, the question is, did he lost? That's not necessarily true. No, because the question is who's the halacha like? Is it the Maria Buhov says that's Machlokas Beis Yosef and the Maria Buhov whether the Rush win or lose. Is the main halacha like the Rush, or is the main?
What did people do? They didn't listen to him.
Yeah, yes, you'll see. I can't give next week's shiur today. I mean, okay.
Moshe was born in 1895.
1895. So in 1934, he was 39 years old. So it's amazing.
I just Sperber is alive and well.
Oh, he is? Oh, okay.
Sure.
But the amazing thing with Ramosha is that Ramosha was the most modest person, and still he wasn't afraid to take strong positions. Okay.